I'm originally from Canada. I'm a graphic designer and a contemporary artist, and I've been practicing contemporary art for about 10 years now. And during that time, I started making things originally by hand, and then moved into a kind of a more of a digital practice. So a lot of my work ultimately gets created on the computer, but then turned into actual physical art objects. Sometimes that's because I have it printed on materials like cardboard, which I then fold up into sculptures. And sometimes I kind of have it printed on things like vinyl or Dibond, and sometimes I hand paint it onto metal. So it takes all sorts of different kinds of forms, but generally it starts digitally and then it ends up in an analog format. A lot of my work actually has an archaeological sort of component to it. A lot of my early works were actually based on artifacts like Greek vases, but also things like Egyptian sarcophagi. I was really interested in the way that in the past civilizations would often sort of decorate containers. So they would make a physical object that was usually meant to hold something, and then they would decorate its surface. So you see it with Greek amphora, but you also see it with Egyptian sarcophagi. Obviously, they're meant to carry a body, but then they're also heavily decorated. So I'm especially interested by hieroglyphics and all the kind of Egyptian decorations. I don't know why, but I love the mythology. I love the colors. I've worked in Egypt for the last couple of years with a project in Memphis. So I've seen a lot of it firsthand, and it's really amazing. And I must say, I just sort of can't stop myself from putting it in my art. I find that the symbols get a lot more power the more I repeat them in my different pieces. So sometimes they'll have a consistent meaning through across all my sculptures or my paintings, and sometimes they will change as I go across, as I sort of make new work. So it's kind of exciting to kind of see something that I've done, 2 years later that has the same symbols as an early piece, but the meanings can sort of have evolved over time. This is a sort of a commission that I responded to. They're trying to regenerate the south part of Leeds. It's an area called Leeds South Bank, and it's located near the area of Holbeck. And they basically wanted to take one of the buildings in that area, which is occupied, but is in a bit of a sort of a derelict state. And they wanted to do something that sort of energized it and really sort of brought new color and new life back to the area. So what they wanted was something that could make use of the window spaces, and there were 32 windows across the whole building, so it was a very large canvas to work with. And they wanted something that could fulfill all those kind of windows, but also provide a kind of a narrative story and something that related to the area of Holbeck. So basically what I did was I researched the area. I found out about its past and obviously what's going on in the present. And I found out some of the projects that are going to happen in the future, like a new major train line is going to be coming into that area. So working with the city to find out what they were interested to have, I basically put everything together into essentially a big map. If you look at the thing from one end to the other, it actually is a map of the South Bank area. But it mixes things that used to be there and are no longer there and things that will be there in the future. So it's kind of a strange pastiche. And it's presented almost like a comic book in the sense that it's made up of different little cells that tell different stories. So the idea is that you would walk from one side of the building to the other, recognize the landscape you're in, and even find where you're standing right now in that artwork, and learn a little bit of something about the past and also the present of the area and the future. Well, back in 2010, I had my first solo show, and basically I was given a lot of freedom to put whatever I wanted to have into the show. And I'd had a bunch of ideas at that time, and one of them was to make some artwork that looked a lot like street signs. And I didn't, rather than just paint something that looked like a street sign on wood or canvas, I wanted a material that actually was used legitimately for street signs. So you see Dibond used all over the place in that sort of capacity. So I found a printer that could print on it. I created the work digitally, and it was a fairly small sign, but it used the same iconography as street signs, but also brought in Greek mythology, Egyptian mythology, and related to sort of contemporary events. After that, I also made another piece using Dibond, a much larger piece. It was actually intended to look at like a giant altarpiece. The artwork was in a church in Leeds, and the the idea was that it would have these sort of folding wings, so it was meant to look like a triptych like you would see in the early Renaissance or the Middle Ages, but responding to contemporary events. The theme of the exhibition was dealing with sort of William Blake, one of his poems that deals with people going from Jerusalem to England. And so it seemed very fitting, this idea of people trying to get from the Middle East to Europe. And so I incorporated that into a work that looked old in some ways, but also was very contemporary, and also used iconography from street signage. Well, for this piece, I mean, right off the bat, when I sort of proposed the work, I figured that Dibond would be the most suitable material to use, partly because I just really like the finish. You know, it's strong, you know, printing works very well on it, so something like wood wouldn't have made any sense. And to be honest, it's because I'd used it in the past, it just made sense in this case. But some foams are just, they're either too soft, or the print looks fuzzy and it just doesn't have the surface quality I wanted. So I went straight away looking for some place that could print high resolution on Dibond. The other reason I chose Dibond is partly because of its strength. It's very rigid, so I knew that because it was going to have to be up for many years, I didn't want a material that would sag over time or crack. But also because we're putting some of the artworks into very tall windows, there, you know, was a concern, obviously, that it would be able to be something that they could lift up to the top windows, and that could be supported without problem. So, because Dibond is lightweight, it seemed like an obvious choice, especially for the upper panels, where safety was a concern. One of the things we encountered when we were installing the artwork is that because the building is from the Victorian era, all the windows look symmetrical, but actually are often a few millimeters off. So when it came time to actually install things, we found that some of the panels actually didn't quite fit. They were just a little bit too big. So basically the workers on site just sort of quickly, you know, drew the line where they needed the edge to go, and were able to sort of cut it very quickly. Also, there were a couple pipes that needed to go through the Dibond, and they were actually able to cut through the Dibond even after it had been installed very easily. So that made it a much simpler process than it could have been.